Hello, my awesome pre-calculus class. Welcome to our third online math adventure. We are still in section 6.2, graphs of other trigonometric functions. We are continuing with our graph of the tangent curve. And this is the tangent curve that we're going to graph today using our 5 steps. So let's again review our 5 steps. Step number 1, solve the three-sided inequality. Step number 2, find the period. Step number 3, identify the increment. Step 4, list the 5 critical numbers. And step 5, sketch one cycle. We're also going to review our standard equation for the tangent function. Y equals A times tan of the quantity bx minus c plus d. We're going to solve this inequality. We use this inequality with these endpoints, negative pi over 2 and pi over 2, whenever we want to find 2 consecutive vertical asymptotes. So that's our purpose. And our formula for the tangent curve is going to be pi divided by the absolute value of b. We're going to look at our equation that we're going to sketch to identify the A, B, C, and D. Well, the A is 5, the B is understood to be a 1, the C is a negative pi over 4. You have to remember that x plus pi over 4 is the same thing as x minus a negative pi over 4, or you could remember just to take the opposite of this number right here to give you the C. There is no D, so the D is equal to 0. That's y equals 0, which means our horizontal axis is going to be the x-axis. So our first step is where we're going to solve our inequality. And when we solve our inequality, we want to get the x in the middle. So we're going to subtract pi over 4 from all 3 sides of the inequality. Now, before I continue to do that, I want to review something. Negative pi over 2 is the same thing as negative 2 pi over 4. And I was doing that to get everything that has a like denominator so that we can add and subtract them. So negative pi over 2 minus pi over 4 becomes negative 2 pi over 4 minus pi over 4, which is a negative 3 pi over 4. So that's how we're getting right here this negative 3 pi over 4. And then pi over 4 minus pi over 4 is 0. And then pi over 2 minus pi over 4 will give us pi over 4 because the pi over 2 is 2 pi over 4 minus the 1 pi over 4 gives us the pi over 4. Remember, when we solve our inequality, this first number is going to be the first critical number. It's also going to be where we're going to have a vertical asymptote. This will be our 5th critical number, and it's also where we're going to have a vertical asymptote. Step 2 is to find the period. And remember that the period tells us how many radians it takes to complete one cycle. So here's our step 2, the period. The pi divided by the absolute value of b. The b is 1, so the period is pi radians. The increment is the period divided by 4, so our period is pi, and it's pi divided by 4. So that's our increment. Here we have our step 2 and our step 3. Our step 4 is to find the 5 critical numbers. Well, the first critical number we got from our inequality. Then we add our increment, and we're getting negative 2 pi over 4, which reduces to a negative pi over 2. We take our negative 2 pi over 4 and add the increment to get the negative pi over 4, because remember, we can only add and subtract fractions when we have like denominators. We then take the third critical number and add our increment, we get 0. Take our fourth critical number, add our increment, and we get pi over 4. So we're going to have as our critical numbers negative 3 pi over 4, negative pi over 2, negative pi over 4, 0, and pi over 4. Now we're ready for our step 5, where we're going to sketch our tangent curve here. And notice that the A is greater than 0 because A is equal to 5. So as we move from left to right, the tangent curve is going to be an increasing function. So we're going to put our 5 critical numbers. You see, negative 3 pi over 4, negative pi over 2, negative pi over 4, 0, and pi over 4. We're going to put our vertical asymptotes. Remember, the curve will be getting closer and closer and closer to the vertical asymptotes, but never touching them, never crossing them. And also remember that the vertical asymptotes are not a part of the graph. We're putting them as a part of the graph so that when we sketch one cycle, we will not go beyond that. And remember that our amplitude, not the amplitude, but the A is 5, because we don't have an amplitude when we have a tangent curve, because it increases and decreases infinitely. So here we have the negative 5. Now, since our tangent curve is increasing as we move from left to right, at the second critical number, we're going to go down to our A. You see, we're using the A to get other points on the tangent curve. The middle critical number, we're going to always have a point on the horizontal axis. And then here is our fourth critical number. We're going to use our A to find a third point. So those are our points. And we have to curve this sort of a little bit that's concave down. Then we have a little half that's what concave up. And you see how it's getting closer and closer and closer to what the vertical asymptotes, but never touching them, never crossing them. I'm hoping that since we've been doing this for a while, you're getting used to those 5 steps. And I want you to remember that when we have our video, you want to stop, rewind, and review. Stop, rewind, and review. And that is it for today. And my love goes out to you. Bye-bye.